Okay, slight change of plans.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going back to what we talked about on Monday about the Rambam versus the Rush. Okay, on the question of can you paskin out of the Mishneh Torah? Okay, so just to get ourselves back into this, and because I really wanted to include this on Monday, but I didn't have time, and then I forgot to do it yesterday. I want to read the full or a fuller excerpt from the Tosfos Yom Tov that that we saw referenced in the actual Aruch Shulchan's Hakdamah, but I want to show you the full thing. Yeah.
How do you even cite this, or is it just?
Yeah, I'll figure it out. I'll remember it. Okay, so this is I'm reading from footnote 33 in one of the Hakdamos. What page is it on in the Chabad?
17.
17, yeah. So in page 17 of the Chabad, one volume Mishneh Torah. Ooh, wait, Isaac is here. Wow. Isaac, you just said you can't make it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I hope you're not changing plans. Okay. Well, I hope it doesn't interfere with Shalom bias or Shalom trip.
No, this is totally good.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. So we're just gonna
work out perfectly.
Okay. Good. I was just saying that we're gonna rev into this by doing something I meant to do on Monday, just to set up the question, and then I'll show you an answer. Okay. So he says this is the footnote guy. I really don't know who the footnote guy is, and it's going to take me too long to find out. So we'll just call him the footnote guy. Chashav l'tzayin sheda'ato shel haTosfos Yom Tov v'Hakdamah l'Sefer Ma'adani Yom Tov hi hafucha v'kitzonis legamrei. So it is important to cite the opinion of the Tosfos Yom Tov in his introduction to the book Ma'adani Yom Tov, which is a completely opposite extreme opinion. He'll say to what? Whosoever he holds that there is no way to paskin from the Rambam at all. So this is contrary to like what we've established is the Rambam's shita himself. And that the Rambam's intent is that you can only make halachic conclusions only after iyun, meaning in the Talmud, as he'll say, and that this is the Rambam's opinion himself. So this is actually what I was referring to last time. So I said like this: Rambam clearly holds that the Mishneh Torah is written to be able to derive halacha from by anybody, katan or gadol. Either he directly says the halacha, or you could arrive at it through what he provides without iyun rachok. The Rush holds the other position, which is that the Rambam is wrong, that you can't paskin out of the Mishneh Torah. And then this is a third opinion, which is Tosfos Yom Tov, who holds that the Rambam himself held like the Rush. Yeah.
Where the heck does the Rambam say that? Just to be double clear into
in the Hakdamah to the Sefer Mitzvos. Yeah. You want me to read it again? I can read it again.
Hakdamah to the Sefer Mitzvos in the Mishneh Torah.
No. To the Sefer Mitzvos in the Sefer Mitzvos.
How can?
No, he says in the Mishneh Torah also.
Okay, well, I think more in the Mishneh Torah.
Yeah, well, in the Mishneh Torah, I mean,
it could be like he was planning on doing it, they just fell apart.
Okay, fine. So in the Mishneh Torah, he says it in the end of the Hakdamah. Let me get it up here. Hakdamah. It's in my edition. It's in Os. Chaf. Let's see. Nope, not Chaf. Yours might be a different numbering. Where are we here? Lamed Tes. Yeah. Mipnei Zeh? Is that what yours says?
I'm not sure what do you mean by Os? So
at the end of the first part of the Hakdamah before the minyan and mitzvos.
I don't even have that.
You do. It's.
I mean, I don't even have Lamed Tes.
Okay, Mipnei Zeh. There's a paragraph that begins with Mipnei Zeh.
Yeah, no, fine.
Okay, so because of this, Ni'arti Chotz Rambam didn't have letters either. I girded my loins. Ani Rabbi Moshe Maimon Asfardi Nishan Vel Tur Baruch V'Vinosu B'Chol Elu Asfarim. I understood all these books. V'Ra'isi L'Chaber Dvarim Hamisbarim Mikol Elu HaChiburim Be'inyan Ha'asar V'Mutar V'Tamim V'Tahor. And I saw fit to compile from these statements, these clarified statements, from all these chiburim in regards to the Asr, the Mutter, the Tam, and the Tahor, Im Shar Dinei Torah Kulan, and with all of the Dinei Torah, all of them, Belashon Bura B'derech Katsara, all in clear and concise language, Ad Shetehei Kol I should say Torah Sheba'al Peh Kula Sedur B'fi Hakol, to the point where Torah Sheba'al Peh is arranged in the mouths of everyone, below Kushiv, below Puruk, without any questions or refutations. Below Ze Omer B'ko Ze Omer B'ko, not this person saying this and that person saying that. Ella Devarim Berurim, clear matters, clear statements, Krovim, accessible, Nechonim Al Pi HaMishpat, all in accordance with the law. Asher Yisbar Mikol Elah HaChiburim HaPirushim HaNimtzayim Mimos Ravina HaKadosh Ad Achshav. All in accordance with the law that's been clarified from all the compilations and the explanations that are found from the time of Rabbeinu Kadosh until now. To the point where all the laws are evident to the small and the great. Bedin kol mitzvah in the law of each and every mitzvah. Ubedin kol advarim shetiknu chachamim u'neviim. And in the laws of everything that was established by the Chachamim and the Nevi'im. Klal Shadavar, some of the matter is that no person should need any other book in the world for any law of the laws of Israel. Rather, this will be a compilation of the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh, not the Gemara, the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Im hatakanos v'haminhagos v'hagziros shenasu Moshe Rabbeinu ba'ad chibur Talmud. Along with the Takanos Minhagos and Gezeros that were made from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until Chibur Talmud, and as it was explained by the Gaonim in all of their compilations that were made after the Talmud. Therefore, therefore I call this book the restatement of the Torah. Because a person will read Torah B'Ksav first, and then he'll read this, and he will not need to read any other book in between. So this is for all of the dinim in all of Dinei Israel. Okay. Yeah.
So we're all including that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And the statement in the Hakdamah is clear, and then in his letters it's clear also.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you're fine to ask it. I just yeah. Okay. So Tosfos Yom Tov though claims as follows: the Achrei Harif Kam Harav Hagadol Harambam Zal. After the Rif arose the Rambam. The Achas Lo Derech Katzar Aperes, and he took another concise approach. The Sulto Solus Nakia. His flour is fine flour. The whole Piskei HaMishnah Gemara for all of the psaks. That's good. That's okay. For all of the psaks of the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Chibram al Seder HaHalachos B'Lashon Noach. The Katzer Yidaber El Ha'am, and he compiled them in the order of halachos in an easy, concise language that speaks to the people. Kol din v'das k'moshehu. Each and every law and ordinance as it is. Mibli tes tam v'das, without giving any reasoning or his or opinion. Rak gozer omer, like someone who's decreeing. Okay, like the Rush, that's someone who's prophesying. The kum aseh v'shev el taseh. Get up and do this. Don't do this. The tekshav lo l'tzedakah, and this is considered for him as a righteousness. So in other words, so far this is all complimentary. Amnam lo nimlat zeh mima shehoru v'amru b'masechah sota hatanaim mevale olam. But we cannot escape from what Chazal said in Masechah Sota, which says that the Tanaim destroy the world. Now, Tanaim here are not the Tanaim on Amoraim Tanaim. These are the Tanaim who memorized Mishnayos and Brisos, right? Who just like recited them. V'chim mevale olam. Are they the destroyers of the world? V'halom yashve olam hein. Are they the ones who settle the world? Ella, rather, this is still the Gemara. Shemorim halacha mitok mishnasan. They paskin out of their Mishnah. Ubli safik shachibur halaz. So now this is back to Tosfos Yom Tov talking. Without a doubt, this compilation, Humi miyashve olam bavare, it certainly settles the world. In ligmor hahalal achibur kamoshehu. You can't say a full praise on the book as it is. In other words, it's written beautifully and concisely, etc. Aval, and he says, Aval efshar lahoros mitok mishnasa, but it is impossible to paskin out of the Rambam's Mishnah. Now, so far, same as the Rush. In Hefresh Klal, there's no difference at all between Hamora mitoch HaMishnah, Lamora mitoch Chibura, between someone who paskins out of the Mishnah and someone who paskins out of this compilation. The Kasav HaRosh B'Tshuva, and the Rush writes in a Tshuva, Shelo Yore Adam mitoch Chiburo, Im Lo Baki B'Chedrei Gemara. We read this Rush. The Rush says you can't paskin out of the Mishneh Torah unless you're an expert in the Gemaras. Okay, so far this is all the Rush. Okay, out of the Mishneh Torah, yeah. So, which is being likened to passing out of the actual Mishnah, which passing out of the actual Mishnah, the Gemara itself says you can't do without destroying the world. And he's applying that to the Mishneh Torah.
Is there any different requirement at all? Like, would you say that if you are capable of anything that you, anything that says that you have enough expertise in order to paskin out of the Mishneh Torah, I would say that therefore you have enough the same to paskin out of the Mishnah.
I don't think so.
No.
And the reason why I think not is because I don't think anyone holds that the Mishnah was ever intended to be a compendium of Psak Halacha, whereas the Mishneh Torah was. Okay, but now here's where he goes further. Okay, Va'ani Omer, the Tosfos Yom Tov says, I say, Rambam ba'atzmo lo niskapin, that the Rambam himself didn't have this intent to paskin out of the Mishneh Torah. Ela lemisha baki b'chadrei haGemara v'yodei sugyos, except for someone who is an expert in the innermost chambers of the Gemara and knows the sugyos. Rak only sheyila kol adam lachapis ladas al kol din v'din, that this person doesn't know how to find each and every law. Heach yatsa dino laora al pia sugyos. He just doesn't know how to get the laws from the sugyos.
What? That's weird.
Yeah. So again, that's what I'm saying. Well, it's not a contradiction. Well, a contradiction
meaning that it's only for people that are like, he said first he said that the Rambam really intended it for what? For people who
know all of the Gemaras and just can't figure out what the ultimate conclusions should be. Let me give you an analogy. If you're holding by Monday's shiur, okay,
that they know they've at least gone through all of them. And like,
here's what he's gonna.
Are you like the Mikra, the Shnai Mikra?
No. Here's what he's gonna say. Here's what he's saying. He's saying that the Rambam intended the Mishneh Torah to be what the Beis Yosef intended the Shulchan Aruch to be, namely, not as a book of psak like the world thinks, but the Beis Yosef intended the Shulchan Aruch to be for someone who's learning the Beis Yosef, goes through all of it, and just can't figure out what the conclusions are, and then he reads the Shulchan Aruch and says, that's how the conclusion is. But he's going through the whole sugya. This is what the Tosfos Yom Tov holds that the Rambam held about the Mishneh Torah. Yeah.
Does Tosfos Yom Tov also hold the Rambam as an incompetent writer? In that the Rambam doesn't say his sources. How could you hold that if he doesn't?
No. Right, no. So he's not saying that the Rambam intended to present all the Gemara. He I shouldn't say it's an absolute equation to the Beis Yosef. He's saying if you know the Gemara and all the sugyos, then you're gonna basically what it is the way that the Briskers learn the Rambam. The way the Briskers learn the Rambam is they learn him essentially as a perush on Gemara, right? Just written in Psak Halacha form. Instead of in like running commentary form, and so Briskers are not going to open up the Rambam for psak, but they will learn the sugya and like learn it with the Rambam, Yeah. Okay. Now, regarding your question, which is, does he hold that the Rambam is an incompetent writer? You mean because the Rambam explicitly states that this is his intent?
I was going to say because if that was his intent, he should have said sources.
Okay, fine. That you can excuse him, and you can, especially if you have that letter to Pinchas Adayim where he says, "I wish I wrote the source book." But what I do want to say is like this: I thought you meant how could the Tosfos Yom Tov think that this is what the Rambam actually intended when the Rambam so clearly states that you can paskin out of the Mishneh Torah? Yeah,
that's a standing question for sure.
Yeah,
but I'm going to pretend that that's not the question.
Okay, sure.
In my other question.
Yeah.
It seems like that would otherwise make sense because he didn't include his notations.
Yeah.
Then it's like, he's assuming that you're someone who does
right.
who does
right.
Yeah. Why would I need to tell you?
Right. If we ignore that question, then yeah, you could say that. It's just like the Shulchan Aruch also doesn't cite all of the sources because he did that in the Beis Yosef.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So I will answer that question in a little while, though. So he says, "V'gam mipnei she'ena dvarim kulam mesudarim b'chol masachta u'masachta." Also, since not all of the matters are in order in every masachta, sheharbe inyane Shabbos nimtzayim b'shar masachta. Many things in Masechta Shabbos are stated in other masachtos. Many things about the topic of Shabbos are stated in other masachtos. Lozeh nischakim lasos chibur l'mi shekvar yega u'matzay v'yeda sugyas hagemar hahi v'hu yase al pi chiburo. So Rambam wrote his chibur for someone who already exerted himself and knows the sugyas in the Gemara, and now is going to act according to his chibur. The raya gedola l'devarai matzasi shuvas Rambam sheheshiv l'shoalo. This is a bad proof, in my opinion. He's brought a proof from a tshuva of the Rambam where someone asked him, "Eze derech yichshar lo b'limuda." What should be the proper approach I should take to learning? Okay, so this is what the guy asked him. He asked Rambam, like, what should I learn? V'heshi lo. And the Rambam answered him, you should learn the Mishneh Torah with the Rif. You see here the Rambam's clear intent, which is exactly as we said. Now, the reason why this is a bad proof is the guy asked the Rambam, what should I learn? Not, can I paskin out of the Rambam or how can I paskin? And the Rambam himself says in the letters, that of course he's never trying to replace the Gemara, and he says that he taught his students shiur in Gemara all the time. So if you're asking the Rambam, what should I do for learning? That's a completely different question than like, what did you write your book for? So don't quote to me. Don't quote a tshuva of the Rambam with a very weak proof and go against the open statement in the Hakdamah to the Mishneh Torah and in the Sefer Mitzvos and in these other letters. Yeah.
Did the Rambam say that he's not trying to replace the Gemara? Obviously, because that'd be crazy, but just for a second.
Well, he does say he's replacing Torah Shebal Peh, and that also sounds crazy, but just not the Gemara. Yeah.
But because he's understanding that one, he's addressing a different need, and the Gemara's need. The Gemara, what it's addressing, is really teaching you the method of learning, not necessarily the conclusion.
Right.
And so he's like, of course, you learn that. Like,
right.
Even with my conclusions, that's still what you need to like understand how to go through
the
process.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And then he brings in another good source, which I wanted to go through on Monday, which is Va'af Harav Haggadah Mahari Karo. This is Rav Yosef Karo Zal. Lonis Kavim Olam Lahoros. Oh, we read this in the Aruch HaShulchan. Rav Yosef Karo never intended Lahoros Mitoch Sifro to paskin out of his book, the Shulchan Aruch. Chalila v'chalila milach shov alav kazos. We read this. God forbid that he would think this. Rachmi shilamad v'ayin v'sefer haturim im pirush Beis Yosef. The only person who can paskin out of the Shulchan Aruch is someone who learned the Tur and the Beis Yosef. V'chein kasav maharsha sota chaf beis aman aleph. We also read that in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Aruch HaShulchan. U'v'doros halalu shemurim halacha mitoch Shulchan Aruch. Im lo yidiktiku tchila b'davar mitoch Talmud taos nafal v'horasan. And nowadays, if someone paskins out of the Shulchan Aruch without first looking into the Talmud, then they're going to make a mistake. Okay, so now the editor of this Chabad Mishneh Torah says, "Me'anyin uktzas charik." This is very interesting and a little strange. Okay, Acharav soid b'sefer b'sach hachazon ish. I mentioned this on Monday also. The Chazon ish followed in his footsteps. Sh'afhu toin sheharambam lo hiskavin sheyifseku mitoch ba'ofen yashir misifro. That the Chazon ish claimed that the Rambam himself did not intend for you to paskin directly out of the Mishneh Torah. Achas hahochacha shelo. So he gives a proof, which is a little convoluted, which I'm going to skip, and not convoluted in terms of his reasoning, but convoluted in terms of like needing to go through all the facts, which we don't have time for. Okay, I just want to get to the quote from him. So here's the quote from the Chazon Ish. Lefi she'asa Rabbeinu Haramam Sifro. I know it's so funny.
No, it's because the way he's proven, you need to go through convoluted logic.
Well, okay, I'll tell you what it is. He gives a quote from Hilchos Trumos, and then another quote from Hilchos Ma'achalos Asuros, and says that it's clear that the Rambam holds that you need to know the sugya, and from this point, it's clear that the Rambam never intended for you to paskin out of the Mishneh Torah. Just like this very, very like mountains hanging on hairs, No,
this sounds like It sounds like you're using this. You need to know the whole sugya logic to use it. So this is a method where you need to know the whole sugya to even use it.
I feel like I kind of just lost something. Because since the Rambam expected that you knew that you held by the sugya, I thought you would then say, then it's okay for you to paskin out of the Mishneh Torah.
No, then it proves that you can't paskin. No, in other words, he's saying that the Rambam gives a psak in one area and in another area, and if you follow the sugya in the Gemara, then it will, like, he basically claims you can only understand this psak from the Mishneh Torah if you know the Gemaras. Okay, now a person is totally free to make that claim, right? I mean, Ron would disagree with it.
And then it's okay to use that psak.
Well, then you're understanding the sugyas in the Gemara.
Right, but
you're not doing it directly out of the Mishneh Torah.
There, right?
No, because the Rambam.
Then what's the core of that one? If you already did it yourself, then why would?
Because the Rambam is directing you to his opinion, which you can only understand if you go through the Gemaras. It'd be like, again, if I just went through all of this, if you had a shiur from Rav Pesach on the Gemara, he said, okay, Rav Pesach, but what's the halacha l'maisa? And he said, oh, it's this. That's what the Rambam is doing.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So if he's directing you to his opinion, and you can understand it because now only can you appreciate his opinion because you understood the sugya. Obviously, though, he's directing you to his opinion because that may not have been, even if you did understand the sugya, you might not have arrived at that particular opinion. Right. So then, okay, now that you do see the opinion, do you still not have at that point the right to go. You know what? I'll go with this opinion. I didn't think about this opinion before, but you know what? I can go with
Yeah,
this.
that's totally fine.
That is
My,
fine.
my objection is saying that the Rambam, that you can prove from there that the Rambam never intended his book to be a book of halacha. That's insane. That's absurd. Okay, but let's see. He goes one step further than Tosfos Yom Tov. He says, quote, Lefisha asa Rabbeinu harambam's sifro lifnei chachamim velo lifnei hedyotos. The Rambam wrote his book for chachamim and not for ordinary people, which again, the Rambam says explicitly in Hakdamah, he wrote this for a gadolim and katanim. Okay, hold on a second. U'kamosha kasav harash, as the Rush wrote, she'ein sefer yad hachazaka muvan ela la'achar habekius haruya b'sugyos shel motei hadin. That the sefer of the Yad Chazaka is only understandable after you've gone through the Bekius and the sugyas to find the source of the law. Now, what the author of the Chabad footnote is saying, he's saying that, okay, let me review the sheet just again. Rambam, according to plain pshat, says you can paskin out of the Mishneh Torah. The Rush says the Rambam is wrong. The Rambam thought you could paskin out of the Mishneh Torah, but I disagree. The Rush, disagree. Tosfos Yom Tov is claiming the Rambam agreed with the Rush, and the Chazon Ish is saying, now this is the new point, Chazon Ish is saying that when the Rush was stating his own opinion, he was actually interpreting the Rambam's intent. So the Chazon Ish is trying to make everyone agree with the Chazon Ish, which is why you'll see how the Chabad author characterizes it. This is the end of what we're going to do here. Lanu nidme shagam etzem ha'amasas kavanas elu barambam k'moshe kasav Tosfos Yom Tov hi ha'amana mechudeshes. He says, to us it seems that this projection onto this stance on the kavanah of the Rambam, as was written by Tosfos Yom Tov, is a new position. And Kal v'chomer, the statements in the Chazon Ish, hamavakshin laha'amis parshanus zo b'soch divrei harash, that the Chazon Ish is trying to project these words into the words of the Rush, ki'ilu hu ba lefarish es amadas haRambam atzmo, as if the Rush was trying to explain the position of the Rambam. But that's not what the Rush was doing. The Rush was trying to state his disagreement with the Rambam, not his justification of the Rambam. So it's like an opposite of an opposite, you know? It's like if I disagree with you, and then you come along and explain like my words as though I'm defending him. Like, it's just a backwards thing, you know?
Are we just saying the Chazon Ish is wrong?
But he's not only, so he's wrong about two things. He's wrong about what the Rambam intended to do, and he's wrong about what the Rush was trying to do. He claims that the Rush was interpreting the Rambam when really the Rush was disagreeing with the Rambam.
Or maybe we need a Chazon Ish, the Chazon Ish.
Oh, that's really not what he meant. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, Chazon Ish is all the way down. Yeah, yeah. Okay, looks like Isaac had to go. Okay, all right, fine. So, the last part. Binyanim elu dvarim marchike leches ukshita haniris mugzemes v'she'inam mukbelas b'lashon hama'at. Okay, fine. So then he goes and he says what we have been saying, that the Rambam definitely intended to paskin from the Mishneh Torah, and even if we disagree with it, that's definitely what the Rambam intended. And he says that the Lubavitcher Rebbe also held that, like, you know, if you need to, you can paskin out of the Mishneh Torah, even though, like, you know, the Chabad does not do that because Chabad has the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is their Shulchan Aruch, you know, fine. Okay. So our question is what? Their Chabad, the founder of Chabad is Shlomo Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe, and he wrote his own Shulchan Aruch for Chabad Hasidim, and that's what. Whenever Chabad Hasidus was founded in like the 1700s.
So it's actually older than the
Yeah, yeah. Liadi. Shlomo Zalman of Liadi is 1745 to 1812. Yeah. Okay. So so our outstanding question on. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, so not our outstanding question. Our question on Tosfos Yom Tov is: did the Tosfos Yom Tov really think that the Rambam held this? If I want to be down the Kafschus, what I'm going to say is no, he didn't really think this. He's just engaging in polemics, and he doesn't want anyone to like paskin out of the Rambam. Yeah.
Well, on the other hand, this might only be since that's really I totally wrong was the cover of the. I feel like I'm down a double trap because either he failed to show that he was doing a source book, or he just failed to write a clear book. Because if Gedol Bar have questions on it, it obviously can't be clear.
No. I doubt. First of all, The source book thing, I don't think is a question because he's saying that he's expected to go through all the sugyas. And then the other thing is also like, is anyone going to accuse Rashi of not being clear just because there are hundreds of super commentaries on him? Right. No, that's how Chachamim write. Chachamim write, and like there are, because there's such a higher level of the Chacham, then like their words need to be explained. What you could say is if you held that the Rambam was paskening for the average individual, then you could accuse him of not being clear, right? But no, he's saying that the Rambam did not intend to paskin for the average individual. He was writing for a chachamim.
No, I'm not talking about the Tosfos Yom.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about the Hakdamah.
Of the Rambam.
Yes.
So you're just asking a question on the Rambam.
As I'm saying, like, is in the fact that you have these achlokas.
Okay. So
shows like
okay.
I guess serves as my question for the Tosfos.
Okay, so this brings me to why I wanted to give this year today and why we did a change of plans. Okay, so the question we left off with on Monday was, given all we know about halacha, how could the Rambam think he could do this? Right? Rambam knows that all the chachamim before him, including the Gaonim that he wrote about, gave psak halacha. And then a few generations later, people couldn't understand it. So how could the Rambam think that he could do any better, right? So was he just extremely arrogant, chas v'shalom? And it seems like from the rush that you need to learn through the sugyas. That's where we left off, okay? So the question's on the Rambam. All right. So here's what I was going to say, which I censored myself because it was so radical that I didn't want to say it. Okay, I talked about it with Isaac, and his reaction was the wow emoji, okay? What I want to say is like this, is if your premise was that the Rambam was advocating the same view of psak as the other Rishonim, then it indeed would be seemingly like a foolhardy admission, like that the Rambam thinks he could just like paskin and it would be clear to everyone. Okay, but if you say that the Rambam was doing something else entirely and had a completely different idea of what Mishneh Torah psak is, then there's room. But now the question is, what is that? And that, what psak is, okay? And this brings us to the book that I read from before, from Maimonides' Life and Thought by Moshe Halbertal, which I just finished last week, okay? So he's going to state a vision of an answer to this question, okay? So this
is there already, before this idea, more than one possible answers for what psak is, or was it seemingly unanimous up until this?
It's a good question. So to do that question justice, we would have to read through the Rambam's Hakdamah and through the part of this chapter before that, and I want to avoid that because it's going to get into other questions that we don't have time for. Okay, so he says like this. Okay, so this is in Moshe Halbertal. I have the page numbers, whatever. Okay, I'll say it though because it's page 181. Okay, but we're gonna read a bunch. Okay, and I have a part that I want to read, and then if Yosef is like jumping out of his chair, then we'll read on. Okay, or you, yeah, but I feel like you're gonna be the one who jumps if anybody. Okay, so he says like this. If anyone wants to follow along and hear, they can. Okay. Mishneh Torah, the moderate and radical alternatives. Maimonides' approach to the authority of the Talmud and its connection to Jewish geopolitics plays a significant role as well with respect to the Mishneh Torah itself as a composition. There are two principal possibilities for understanding Mishneh Torah as a composition. I will call one moderate and the other radical. The distinction will help us to define more sharply the role played by Maimonides' concept of Talmudic authority in matters related to his tract. Okay, so here are the views. The basic question regarding the essence of Mishneh Torah is as follows. Did Maimonides believe Mishneh Torah to be an accomplished, perhaps perfect representation of the halacha, or did he believe it to be the halacha itself? I'm going to read that again and then he'll explain. Okay. Did Maimonides believe Mishneh Torah to be an accomplished, perhaps perfect representation of the halacha, or did he believe it to be the halacha itself? Let me clarify the question. Yeah.
So basically, do you think it would be new tomorrow?
Yes. Okay, so let's let him flesh it out though, okay, in his own words. That's halacha itself. Okay. Let me clarify the question by reference to jurisprudence in general. The literature of the law, now this is about all jurisprudence, not just in halacha. The literature of the law includes numerous treatises written by various experts on various areas of law, torts, contracts, criminal law, and so forth. These treatises have a considerable influence on judges' rulings, and they are regarded as accomplished, crystallized representations of the law, but the legal system is not bound by them as it is bound by a statute. Okay, so for example, I'm a judge, I write a whole book on torts, right? Other judges will look at my book and say, oh, this is a very refined expert opinion. Maybe this is represents the best formulation of tort law possible, but my book is not the law. The legal system produces the law. My book is something that is consulted in order to understand the legal system, and it might weigh into the legal system, but the book I write about the legal system is not synonymous with law. I can't write laws as an individual legal scholar. Okay. According to the moderate reading, Mishneh Torah is a treatise of this sort, dealing with the entire range of halacha. It is a broad, comprehensive representation of the halacha to be taken into account by decision makers in their rulings. Okay, so I think that, again, that's how the Briskers view the Mishneh Torah, right? There's no fundamental difference in the eyes of Briskers between the Mishneh Torah and Rashi and Tosfos and the Ran, except in terms of the style. But essentially it is, there's a halakhic system, and then this is one book of a great chacham who wrote about halacha. Okay, but it is possible as well that Maimonides considered Mishneh Torah to be not a representation of the law, but the law itself. In this radical reading, Mishneh Torah plays the role of a set of laws that are binding in the same sense as the Talmud. That's what you said. Yeah.
I also just think he's a Talmud Bali, because the Talmud Bali it's not halacha. It's one interpretation of Mishnah. There's the Yerushalmi as well.
Okay.
It's just everyone.
But yeah, and that is going to be key in the Rambam's understanding. Okay, so he says like this: the distinction between the moderate and radical readings can be set up as follows. On the radical alternative, Maimonides believed that a future judge ruling contrary to the Mishneh Torah would have erred on a matter of law. His situation would be that of one who had erred in regards to something stated explicitly in the Talmud, and his ruling would be null because Mishneh Torah is the halacha. In the moderate alternative, in contrast, Maimonides believed that such a judge might have erred in his reasoning. His ruling does not contradict a halakhic principle itself, but it fails to follow, perhaps erroneously, a better understanding of the halacha. Okay, so let me state this with other people just so you make it more familiar. Okay, when Tosfos disagrees with Rashi, right? Tosfos is basically saying, I hold that Rashi does not have the best interpretation of the Gemara. Okay, but he and I are both legal scholars trying to interpret the Gemara, and the Gemara is law. Okay,
we're just trying to figure out what is that.
We're trying to figure out what the law is. Okay, right? But it'd be very different but what he's saying that the Rambam might have held, according to this radical view, is that disagreeing with the Mishneh Torah or paskin against the Mishneh Torah would be like paskin against the Gemara itself.
Right, not like paskin against the Rashi.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So in that idea, why call it Mishneh Torah?
Well, he calls it the Mishneh Torah because it is a restatement of the Torah path. Because Mishnah means restatement or review, and Torah is the Torah. So he holds that that you basically have the original Torah path that was given at Sinai, and then this is a full statement of that Torah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mishnah is also Torah.
This is Mishneh Torah, not Mishnah.
Right.
Mishneh is duplication.
Right. So what is the Mishnah then? It's not.
The Mishnah is, according to the Rambam, the Mishnah was a compilation of notes to prevent Torah Shabbat from being forgotten by teachers. Mishnah was never intended to be something that was halacha. It's just Torah Shabbat was still essentially balpad, but it's like reminders. Yeah. Okay. And there's a lot more to say on that, but I just don't want to go into that issue. Okay. So he says like this, the distinction between the moderate and radical possibilities may be articulated as a distinction between retail and wholesale authoritativeness. Okay, this is another good mashal. In the moderate reading, the authority of each ruling within the Mishneh Torah derives from its correct interpretation of the halacha's canonical sources. Okay, and that's exactly what the Rush holds. The Rush holds what makes the Rambam's rulings that are correct is the fact that they're in line with the sugyas, right? Okay, each and every ruling is evaluated individually on a retail basis to determine whether it is in fact successfully represents the halakhic literature. If, however, Mishneh Torah is halacha itself, its authority must be considered on a wholesale bias. The instant the book is recognized as canonical, the authority of Maimonides' rulings stems from what H.L. Hart termed the rule of recognition, which assigns force to all the rulings without considering the reliability of each one individually. Yes.
Basically, it's equivalent of, for whatever reason, people today just accept the Bali as automatically authoritative without looking at
Yes.
the Pesukim, and they don't care whether or not like the Bali is worse at the Pesukim.
Exactly.
They just say Bali, and
Bali is authoritative because Klal Yisrael accepted it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that would, and according to this, it would mean that the Rambam could be making mistakes even, right? But it would be binding in the same way as you have, every machlokas Tanaim is like machlokas, Rabbi Akiva versus the Chachamim, Rabbi Meir versus the Chachamim. I'm sure Rabbi Akiva would hold that the Chachamim were wrong, but halacha follows them, and that's the halacha, Okay, but now the question would be, what gave the Rambam the right to think that the Mishneh Torah had this status?
Right.
Okay, right. Answer is he didn't think that. He hoped for it. Okay, here's what he says. If Maimonides, in fact,
the right to hope for it.
Okay, that's a good question also. Okay, if Maimonides in fact believed that his rulings in the Mishneh Torah constituted halacha itself, and that his book had canonical status in the same sense as did the Mishnah and the Talmud, we may reasonably ask what he thought to be the source of the book's authority, right? Who died and put the Rambam in charge? Okay. The question would not concern us if Maimonides believed his Mishneh Torah simply to be a representation and summary of the halacha, i.e. on the moderate reading, for its authority would then derive from its accomplished review and presentation of earlier authoritative sources, right? No one asked Rashi, who gave you the right to write a commentary? He says, it's my commentary, take it or leave it, right? Rashi's not saying, I'm going to be the posek for all Klal Yisrael, right? Okay, but if the Mishneh Torah is halacha itself, the radical reading, what is the source of its authority and what transforms it from a magnificent representation of the law into a binding canonical text? Okay, that's the question. Okay, what's the answer? Maimonides appears to answer this question by again constructing halachic history and folding into his concept of Talmudic authority. The premise that the Talmud is binding because it spread to and was accepted by all of Israel lays the groundwork for the possibility of the Mishneh Torah being transformed into a binding halakhic book in the event that it too is accepted by all of Israel. Pause for 1 second and even pause before you have your question here. Because the author wrote about this earlier in his chapter, and we don't have time to read it, I want to read to you where in the Rambam's Hakdamah he says this. Yeah. Okay. So even if you disagree with this, this is what the Rambam himself holds. Okay. Bavli. Too many B's. Bavli. Yeah. So he says, this is in his history of the Talmud, and he says, he says like this: Nimsa, Ravina, Ravashi. So it turns out that Ravina and Ravashi were the ones who compiled the Talmud Bavli. V'chavrehem and their peers. Sof Gdolei Chachmei Yisrael Hamatikim Torah Shebal Peh. They're the end of the great Chachmei Yisrael who transmitted Torah Shebal Peh. V'shegazru Gezeros v'his kinu takanos v'hinhigu minhagos, who enacted Gezeros and takanos and minhagos. And here's the key phrase: Upashtu Gezerosam v'takanosam uminhagosam b'chol Yisrael b'chol makomos moshvosehem. And their Gezeros, takanos, and minhagos spread through all of Israel and all of their dwellings. Okay. The Achar Beis Dino Shel Ravashi, after the Beis Dino of Ravashi, Shechibra Talmud B'mei Beno B'gamro, who compiled the Talmud in the days of his son and completed it. Nis Pazru Yisrael B'chol Ha'aratzos Pizro Yeser. The Jews dispersed even more. V'hikiu l'ktzavos u'li'im ha'rechokim, and they went to the far-off islands and extremities. V'rabas ha'katata ba'olam, and strife increased in the world. V'nishtabshu hadrachim b'gayasos, and the road became blocked. V'nisma Talmud Torah, and Talmud Torah went diminished. Lo nichnesu Yisrael lilamod b'yeshivosem alafim ravavos k'mo shayu mikodem, and people no longer went into learning the yeshivas in the thousands. Only individuals gather, the distinguished individuals that God calls out to, in each and every city and province. And they all learned these books and figure out what the law should be. Now here's the next key phrase. Any Beis Din that arises after the Talmud in each and every province, the Gazer, O Hiskin, O Heinhig, Lebnei Medinaso, O Lebnei Medinos, who makes decrees, enactments, or minhagim for the people in its locale, lo pashtu masa b'chol Yisrael. Their actions their work did not spread throughout all of Israel. Because of the distance between them, the shibush hadrachim and the messed up roads. It's also a language, The hios beis din shel osa hamadina yechidim, and the bate dinim of those cities were singular. Beis din hagadol shashivim batel mikama shanim kodem chibra talmud. And the Sanhedrin Hagadol would already cease for many years before the compilation of the Talmud. Okay, one more paragraph. Lefikach, therefore, because they're only local beis dins and not accepted of all Israel. Lefikach in kofin anshe medina zo linhog b'minhag medina acheres. You cannot compel the people of one locale to follow the beis din of another locale. The in only the beis din zeh ligzor gezer shagazru beis din acher b'medinasa. And you can't make another beis din make a decree that was done in another beis din. That was enacted in another beis din. In other words, if I have one beis din in my city and you have a beis din in another city, I can't rule for your people, and I can't make you conform to my gezeros. Why? No, I can't make you enact a gezerah. So I can't paskin for the people, and I can't make the beis din do a gezerah. I think that's what it means. Oh, and this is the most key phrase of all. Not the most key phrase of all. But in terms of the Rambam's authority, if one of the Gaonim learned that this is what the halacha is supposed to be, and another beis din after him arises and says and says that this is not the law that is written in the Talmud. We don't follow the early authority. We follow whoever makes sense to us. So in other words, Talmud is accepted by all of Klal Yisrael, and that is the final source of mishpat. So, and they're the only ones that everyone has to follow. But everyone who comes after the Talmud only has authority over their own locale, and everyone is just trying to figure out what the mishpat of the Talmud is, and go back to that, because that's the only thing that's binding on everyone. Okay, so that's the difference between Talmud Bavli authority and Talmud Yerushalmi authority and Gaonic authority, which is that because the Talmud Bavli came after the Talmud Yerushalmi, and the Rambam does not hold that the Yerushalmi was the final word. He holds that the Bavli was the final word, that took into account all of that. So the Chachmei Bavel were the ones who are like the last authorities. Okay, so now back to Halbertal. Okay, so let me read that sentence again. The premise that the Talmud is binding because it spread to and was accepted by all Israel lays the groundwork for the possibility of Mishneh Torah being transformed into a binding halachic book in the event that it too is accepted by all of Israel. So if the Rambam acknowledged that in his day he was just a lone posek, just like the Gaonim were, and that if the Rambam presented the Mishneh Torah to the Rosh, he would not expect the Rosh to just follow it. He would expect the Rosh to only follow it if it made sense. But what the Rambam would say is, okay, Rosh, let's see if you can get your psak to be followed by all of Klal Yisrael, or if I can get my psak to be followed by all of Klal Yisrael, then it would become binding like the Talmud.
Your ambitions were.
I know, right? No shortage of self-esteem here.
It was like,
yeah, right.
Someday.
Yeah. Oh, so check it. Here's a good statement of what you're expressing. Maimonides claim at the end of the introduction that the Mishneh Torah will ultimately obviate all other halachic literature, and that all Israel will learn halacha from it, is thus not merely an aspiration related to the awesome quality of the treatise. It is also, in effect, the basis for its future canonical status. When Mishneh Torah spreads to and is accepted by all of Israel, it will become canonical in the same way as the Talmud itself. Maimonides' concept of the Talmud's distinctive authority and its integration into the historical narrative he spins thus serves a dual purpose in the introduction. It frees Maimonides from allegiance to the Gaonic halacha, which did not gain acceptance by all of Israel, and it implants in halachic history the conceptual framework that will allow for Mishneh Torah's future authoritativeness as a canonical halachic text. Woo! Ambitious here. Now, just to state this clearly, the Rambam and everyone held that this role used to be played by something else. What used to play this role of deciding halacha for all of Klal Yisrael?
Well, I guess first there was things like the Mishnah Torah, even before that there was the Torah.
Okay, but in terms of like Sanhedrin, right? So Sanhedrin, and I think this is unanimous. I don't know anyone who says that this is not unanimous. In a functioning Israel society, Sanhedrin would have one psak for everybody, right? and everyone would follow it. And it's not like you can't think other opinions. It's not like you can't argue other opinions. It's that it's a mandated halakha for everybody. The Rambam envisioned the Mishneh Torah being a quasi like set of Taryag of Kula Torah Kula from Sanhedrin, but there's just no Sanhedrin and it doesn't have the authority of the Sanhedrin. Okay, let's finish reading the chapter. In light of this unique view of the narrative of halachic history and the potential place of the Mishneh Torah as a canonical work, we can understand Maimonides' self-understanding in the following manner, which is the question we've been dealing with. What did the Rambam think about what he was doing? Okay, so he's going to state that. He portrayed halacha in a profound state of crisis resulting from harsh political conditions that had become progressively worse since the completion of the Talmud. That's what we just read in the Hakdamah. In these circumstances, the prospect of centralized institutional halachic authority, which depends on political stability, was lost. No one can disagree with that, right? That Klal Yisrael does not have centralized political authority, halachic authority, because we don't have centralized political authority. Even in Israel now, we don't have centralized halachic authority. The loss of any possibility of centralized authority, in turn, gave the halacha a localized interim quality, unraveling what had been a uniform, universally accepted system. Maimonides sought to reverse this situation through a dramatic literary exploit that would change the status of halacha without changing the geopolitical conditions that had brought about its fragmentation. Okay, we're really talking here, he's trying to correct a world problem in Jewry through a piece of literature. Very ambitious. He wanted to overcome these harsh conditions by means of a mighty composition that, in effect, would create a virtual center able to serve as a stand-in for political stability. Okay, and again, he's not the only one who's done this, right? Chachamim in the past have done things like this and succeeded. For example, we used to be a Mikdash-centered religion, right? And the Anshe Knesset Hagdola set up the institution of tefillah and tefillah barabim and shuls and communities as a replacement for that, and it worked, right? Like imagine what would happen if there were no shuls and if there were no tefillah b'tibur. So, it did work.
But you wouldn't call that a re-centralization. That is
right. So I don't mean to say that they accomplished centralizations like this. I mean to say that they shifted like halakha realities that were dependent on geopolitical circumstances and made substitutes.
Is the first one to try to re-centralize?
Yes, I think so. The other person who did something similar, though, was the decision to write down Torah Sheba'al Peh by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, where, again, it was not in matters of centralization, but changing the entire format of what Torah Sheba'al Peh was and becoming a text-based, limud. And it worked. And if he hadn't done that, Torah would have been lost.
Right, it would have been too decentralized.
Yeah, right.
So,
you want to say?
You also managed to do it without writing sources.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's a good point. Yeah. And I think the Rambam says that. The Rambam says that it might be in his letter to Pinchas Dayan, where he's like, what do you mean you're bothered by the fact that I am writing stuff without sources? What I'm writing is a chibur. A chibur is a summary compendium, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi did the same thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because the Gemara doesn't cite sources?
No, the Mishnah does not cite sources.
Oh, right. Yeah. It sort of does, right? By saying who says this guy says that,
but not where it comes from.
Not where they got.
Yeah.
Half the time.
Yeah. True.
Okay.
Right.
So once this happened and Mishneh Torah was accepted as like the new Gemara, what would happen to like the ones we currently have? What would happen?
Okay, so I'm going to use an analogy here. Okay, what would happen is the same way that Klal Yisrael treats halachic texts outside of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, right? Most of Klal Yisrael, all of the halacha we follow, is rooted in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, right? And we know that there are other halachic books, like the Rif, right? The Rif was a halacha sefer. The Rush was a halacha sefer, but no one turns to it for halacha. They just turn to it for a theoretical understanding. So that's what would happen to all the other books.
And is it prohibited to turn to them for halacha?
So that would depend on, if you ask for Pesach, he said yes, right? Because he said that they're not why? Because they're not engaged in the same halachic process that we are, of going through sources from beginning all the way through the Rishonim, the Achronim, the Chuvos, and taking all that into account. They were doing their own thing. Yeah. Okay. This effort was particularly audacious because the sought after change would come about solely by dint of the composition's inherent power and its author's greatness and fame. In other words, the Rambam did not hold the Gaonim held actual positions of communal authority, but the Rambam was expecting this to happen just because of the perfection of the Mishneh Torah itself, and the fact that it was written by the Rambam. The face of halacha would be totally transformed without any political or institutional change. Yeah. Now, here's the thing. Actually, let's finish reading and then I'll summarize. Maimonides' account in the introduction to Mishneh Torah is transformed from an aspiration to vision in his letter to his student Joseph. In reassuring his student who found himself, you okay? Okay. In reassuring his student who found himself in the eye of the critical storm raging in Baghdad over Mishneh Torah, Maimonides envisions a time following that initial resentful criticism when Mishneh Torah would be accepted throughout Israel. Quote, all you have told us about those who refuse to accept it as it ought to be accepted, meaning in Baghdad, that is only in my time. In future times, however, when jealousy and the drive to dominate wane, all Israel will be satisfied with it alone, and all else without doubt will be set aside.
Okay. That the reason people currently reject it, at least to some degree, is partly from jealousy.
Yes. And what else? Jealousy and the drive to dominate. Yeah. It's true. I mean, these guys engage in character assassination attempts and try to malign the
who are these guys, just to be clear?
Other chachamim in Baghdad and elsewhere.
I think I would see a reason for the Rambam above these other people.
Okay, well, he did.
I mean, think about his description seems to be just as much in this with them as I don't see a reason why. And
I'm not for me to put words in the mouth of Rambam. I think he would say, and he said something similar in the letter to Pinchas time. Okay, write your own Mishneh Torah, and no one did.
Until they did.
No, I mean, even the Aruch HaShulchan would say that he didn't write his own Mishneh Torah. No, that's not a Mishneh Torah. That's on one small part of halacha. And it's not with only one opinion for everybody. Yeah. It's bringing down lots of it. That's not a Mishneh Torah. Don't give me that that's Mishneh Torah. And the parts of it that are Mishneh Torah are literally the Mishneh Torah. He literally is quoting almost all of his text in the Mishneh Torah. Yeah. Anyway, so he says, last sentence here, given the way Maimonides explains why the Talmud is authoritative and the Goanim are not, the hope for universal acceptance of Mishneh Torah will do more than signify its success. It will be what ultimately confers authoritativeness upon the composition. Okay, so again, whether or not you agree that the Rambam succeeded, and he didn't. I mean, he didn't succeed in this, certainly not.
But say not yet.
I mean, who knows? I think it's too late. I think that ship has sailed. Because the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah have been firmly entrenched as as the go-to books of halacha.
Do they know they were essentially stop putting us an end to that dream? Then do you think?
I don't know. I mean, they weren't so long after. The Rambam, I mean, a couple 100 years, 300 years.
It feels like all the way long. I assume at that point Rambam should be already sailed.
Mm-hmm. I think so also. But I was going to say, so Rambam didn't succeed. Whether you agree with the basis of his project or whether you agree that he should have tried to do it, you got to admire the guts it took to do this, and not only the guts, but the extreme care for Klal Yisrael to want to make a unified halacha for everybody, in order to have a centralized vision of Torah that would allow all Jews to be one community and to pursue their ends individually. It is an amazing goal that is unprecedented. Yeah.
Is that goal just to carry them until there's a new Sanhedrin again?
Yes. Yeah.
So if that's the case, well, what happens with the Mishneh Torah when there is a new Sanhedrin?
So my guess the Rambam would say is as follows: is when the new Sanhedrin comes, then they will be in a position to legislate and for all of Klal Yisrael, and they could disagree with the Mishneh Torah. They could override it or whatever. But then you won't have the problem that the Mishneh Torah is trying to solve anymore. And the Rambam would still probably say that his opinions he thinks are correct, and if he is on that Sanhedrin, that he will debate for his own views, but he wouldn't hold that he had that the book would hold the authority. He would hold that the Sanhedrin would hold the authority. And I know this because that's what the Rambam writes in Hilchos Sanhedrin, that's the purpose of the Sanhedrin. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is the radical view. Oh, so now looking back at our Shnayim Mikra, we're not going to go back to the Aruch HaShulchan today, but if you look back at the Shnayim Mikra, when I said that in the Rambam there is only one halacha about Shnayim Mikra, just that one paragraph, and we saw that there are, I forgot how many thousands of words in the Aruch HaShulchan, and I said, what would the Rambam say about all that? Would he say that he expects you to figure it all out from what he wrote, or would he say that he doesn't care about it? Okay, like that question that we did yesterday of what happens if you do mikra targum mikra, or am I supposed to do all of the parsha with mikra, all of the parsha with mikra, and all the parsha with targum, or can I go each pasuk mikra targum, mikra targum, mikra targum, or like we'll see that there are achronim questions about like what do you do on, this is a question for, this is a real question in achronim, what are you supposed to do at Simchas Torah? Because Simchas Torah is the only one where we read a parsha not on a Shabbos. So when can you start the next week? And all these questions, what would the Rambam say? So you could say that the Rambam held that you had to figure it all out from the Mishneh Torah. Okay, I personally don't buy that because I think that it's too extreme. Okay, you could say that, like I was saying yesterday, that I think the Rambam held that a lot of those halachos developed after the fact, and these are all in the Achronim. Okay, but I think what Halbertal would say on the basis of this radical view is that the Rambam would say that all those halachos don't matter. Okay, because those are all, the only thing that matters is what is written in the Mishneh Torah, and this becomes the halacha. And like, it's nice if you want to debate how to learn the sugya in the Gemara, and maybe you can learn out from the Gemara that you should or shouldn't do this or whatever. But like, he would hold that if the Mishneh Torah succeeds, then this simple version of Shnai Mikra would be the halacha for all of Klal Yisrael. And like, you wouldn't, if you want to be machmir and like do other stuff, that's your thing, Yeah. Okay. All right. Sneak peek for later on. Let's just read the next. Let's read the first paragraph or two of this, and then you'll tell me if you want to do this tomorrow, which is the last day before we break. So this is Mishneh Torah and Jewish curriculum. There are then two entirely different ways of understanding Mishneh Torah as a composition. A more moderate one that sees it as an accomplished representation of the halacha, which again, that's how our yeshiva views it. That's how most yeshivas view it. Okay, and a more radical and daring one that sees it as halacha itself. Okay, the distinction, which is how. I honestly don't know how the modern day Taimani view it. They definitely hold the Rambam as their posek, but I don't know if they hold by this radical view or not.
Most Taimani follow Shulchan.
Okay, fine.
Like, I mean, like there's, I'm guessing first. I think there's a minority. First, there's a minority who would hold it like that, but they're a distinct minority.
Okay, fine. Right. Yeah. The distinction between those views can be taken a step further by taking account of an additional component, no less important with regard to Maimonides' perception of his work: the status of halachic literature predating Mishneh Torah, now that Mishneh Torah has been written. In other words, what does the existence of the Mishneh Torah do for what we're supposed to learn about stuff from before the Mishneh Torah? Okay, is Mishneh Torah a summing up of that earlier literature or a replacement for it? Central to the question is an understanding of the reason Maimonides gives for naming his book Mishneh Torah. Your question, literally repetition of the Torah. A person who first reads the written law and then this compilation will know from it the whole of the oral law without having occasion to consult any book between them. That bold sentence too allows for two entirely different interpretations. So let's just read this and we'll end for today. A more moderate reading will take it to mean that Mishneh Torah is a comprehensive, accessible summary of the halacha for those unable to dwell on it in depth, either because of the intricacy and complexity of the earlier halachic literature or because of the geopolitical crisis that made the halacha fragmented and inaccessible, like the Tosfos Yom Tov held. Okay, for such people, the vast majority of Jews, study of Mishneh Torah makes possible a faithful halachic way of end of page 183 of, where am I? Oh, 130. Faithful halachic way. Why am I not seeing this here?
Check the page number. Make sure you're.
Did I skip a page? Oh, I just copied a page twice. That's funny. Okay, a faithful halachic way of life, and provides a picture of the entire oral Torah. But scholars having the intelligence, leisure, and proximity to study halls and educational institutions that enable them to maintain unmediated contact with the halachic literature should continue to apply themselves to it, toiling in the fields of Torah as before. Okay, so that's conventional view of the Mishneh Torah. Rambam is one rishon of many. If you're just an average person, maybe you rely on the Mishneh Torah, but if you're a Talmid Chacham, you'll learn through the sugyas and consult the Mishneh Torah. Yeah.
So that idea of like, if you're an average person, it's sort of like the default way it goes. It's like, you don't have another option, whatever. Does that also go with the fact that like, in reality, there is no one default way intrinsically in the Torah to like paskin, which is why we have 70 members.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And And all he's saying is, I'm not giving the answer. I'm just giving one acceptable answer until we have a sentence
Yes.
that can actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And here's our last thing we'll end with. The much more radical reading of the statement, however, takes it to mean that the Mishneh Torah does not merely summarize the earlier halachic literature, it actually replaces it. In creating a canonical work of halacha, Maimonides claims, as a practical matter, to have rendered the earlier halachic literature superfluous, quote, without having occasion to consult any other book between them. That far-reaching claim makes the composition of Mishneh Torah an act of immense consequence, not only for halacha itself, but for all of Jewish culture. With the canonization of Mishneh Torah, there disappears from Jewish cultural memory the vast wealth of halachic discourse that incorporated the many rejected opinions, alternative interpretations, and hypothetical rationales, along with the dozens of books by earlier halachas. On this radical interpretation of Mishneh Torah as a replacement rather than a summary, Maimonides meant the work not only to reshape the face of halacha, but also to transform the traditional Jewish curriculum.
Very interesting.
Okay, all right, so let's pick up on this tomorrow then.
I'm curious why no one else tried to do this. I mean, only from the perspective of if you see it as a noble thing because it's just trying to deal with a problem that exists.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't more people try to?
It is a great question. I mean, not that this would deter a lot of chachamim, but like it is. I mean, if you just look at how many of our great chachamim wrote on everything, not even all of them wrote on everything, right? You know, so like that, it's being able to have a working knowledge and to write a work on everything, even if it were just a pirush, not just a pirush, that's massive enough in itself. Secondly, I think that a lot of the people just didn't have the same political standing or political environment that the Rambam had. Some of them did, but like, you know, not all of them are in a position where like, I mean, you know, I don't know if you count the amount of people who like were under the Rambam's like auspices like in his day. I don't really know, but yeah, historical question. Yeah.